right, welcome everyone to the Talking with Tarashuk podcast. It is fresh on a Monday morning as of recording this, so that's always the first thing I like to do on a Monday morning to kick off a brand new week of August. I am joined today by an executive performance coach by the name of Fred Blum. Fred is an executive performance coach who specializes in stress management for high-level C-suite executives. He also teaches the Freedom Course and is a former chiropractor. So a lot of fun things to get into there. Fred, my friend, welcome to the podcast. It's very happy to have you here.
Thank you.
So how are you? Monday morning. Monday morning.
Let's dive right in. It's a new week.
All right. So with that being said, I gave you a nice little intro there. Just introduce yourself. Who are you? What brings you here today? And, what's your story?
Well, I appreciate your having me on your show, Will. What about me? I live here in Austin, Texas. I was, I guess we can get into this at some point. I was a holistic chiropractor for 25 years. I currently work as you say, an executive performance coach, which means that I work with executives, business owners, people that I like to call high performers and overachievers, people that work really, really hard to accomplish some degree of success in life, however people define success. So you may be a mom who raised 4 kids and now you go, that's a success. But at a certain point, they're looking at their life and they're saying, now what? I got everything I thought I wanted and there still feels like there's something missing. And what they're looking at, the hole that they're looking to fill isn't going to be as easy to fill in the world by adding one more success or some new project or something like that. And so that's sort of where I come in, is helping them to find what they're looking for more in here on the inside than in something in the world.
Okay. Yeah, definitely stress is something that made me go, ooh. That was my ooh. My one caveat for this podcast is if you make me go, ooh, that's interesting, then I want to have you on.
Okay.
And that's what got me, because I've talked to a handful of life coaches on this podcast, all very interesting, all very different. Now, you do not technically use the term life coach. You use executive performance coach. What makes you different from all the other life coaches out there? In what way sets you apart? Because I think you're correct. I don't think you're a life coach.
Right. And I don't in any way mean to disparage the term life coach.
Of course.
In fact, when I first heard it 25 years ago, whenever that first came around, I thought, what a cool idea, a coach for life. That made so much sense to me. I just don't personally like being lumped in a category with, tens of thousands of other individuals where you really don't have any idea how one is different from another. So to your point, I don't know this, what makes me different from every other life coach. I think everyone's got their own style.
Right.
I have a particular orientation that I do find unique that I haven't seen much of out there, which is giving people direct experience of what I call their true self, the person, the part of you that is beyond the identity, beyond your ego. And we can get into what all this stuff means, whose very nature is already peace and clarity and freedom and happiness. In other words, for the people, again, the overachievers, the high performers who are seeking happiness in the world, I help them to see that there's really no true happiness to be found in the world. There's temporary happiness to be found in the world, but true happiness, peace, freedom, clarity, etc., is something that we find it's already built in. It's part of our factory settings, but we have been conditioned not to see that and to look outward for it. So that's sort of there are 2 main orientations I have. That's the first one, that people have to learn to what I call who they really are in order to be able to really be happy in life.
And that's hard, right? That's very, very difficult. I remember it took me a little while to actually discover who I truly was. I probably didn't actually figure it out fully until, 20. I was probably 20, 21 years old. And when I actually
which I would say is very young.
Yeah, of course. It is very young. Like here's the thing. I always knew who I was, but it took me a while to accept who I was for who I am. You know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Sure.
It's like, I fought so hard to be someone I knew I couldn't be. So now it's just like, well, fuck it. I am who I am. You can love it or leave it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can get into this. First of all, I think what you're saying is definitely in alignment with what I'm saying. Yeah. And we may, as we go on, get into more nuances about the way I'm describing it and the way you're describing it, because of course, these aren't like set definitions. We can all come at it a little differently.
Right. Now you're also a doctor. So what is your doctorate in?
In chiropractic.
Okay, so you're a doctor in chiropractic. Okay. That's what I thought, but I always want to be sure. So let's stick with life coaching or executive performance coach.
Sure.
So how did you get into that? What makes you just kind of one day and go, you know what? This is my career path. This is what I'm going to do.
Well, there's a couple of answers to that. In no particular order. One of them is that, so I did a very unique type of chiropractic, a system called network spinal analysis, which is, you might call more of a transformational system than anything else. It wasn't really about back and neck pain. It was about resetting the nervous system, if you will, of helping the body mind to resolve deep, long-standing patterns of stress that get locked into the system that affect everything from your physical health to your emotional well-being, to how you show up in the world. And it's really powerful work. And so on one level, what I noticed is I would be taking care of patients every day, and they would leave my office happy, peaceful, flowing energy through their bodies. Mm-hmm. And then they'd go back into their lives and they'd do the same stupid shit. Mm-hmm. They would, be, and that's meant to be funny. I know it's not so easy always to make the changes in your life, but I mean, they'd go back into a job that they hated or a relationship that wasn't working for them, and they're still overeating and they're still doing whatever they're doing. And what I realized is, like the network, we call them entrainments, not adjustments, but they would open the door for people, to really have different life, etc. But it took something. They needed more help than that to actually step through the door. And what they needed was coaching, in essence. And that's the chiropractic environment that I was set up in was not designed to give them that kind of coaching, to really take a moment and dive into these patterns that they had. So when I was getting ready to move from New York to here to Texas, through some shenanigans with the Texas State Board that aren't really that important, they were going to make it more difficult than I had anticipated to get my license here. I could have gotten it, but it would have been a lot of work. And for me, those are always moments in life where you can pause and assess the path that you're on, So for me, it was a moment to say, I've done it for 25 years, and do I want to continue on this path, or is it time for a change? And I decided it was time for a change. And coaching, I hope it always stays this way, is a non-regulated profession. Mm-hmm. So there's nobody out there that can say, when you get to be a coach, there are no qualifications. So anybody can say, I'm a coach, and that's it. You're a coach. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And now it's up to you, to prove yourself to at least your small handful of clients that you have something of value to offer. It's not because the state said I have something of value. You have to prove it to that person, in real time.
I like that you said the word regulation. And the fact that you think that it's unregulated is a good thing. And that's something I tend to go back and forth on with this general line of work, because anytime I talk to a life coach, I think it's important that they say, or an executive coach, that, listen, this isn't, it's like, I need to prove my worth to you, right? It's the fact that there isn't a regulation, I think does work in its favor, because I think it kind of has a stigma of, not like a scam, but it's just like, it's not even, that's not real.
Anyone can do it.
Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it. It's just like, do I work for you? Right? Because sometimes I think life coaching can be similar to therapy, but therapy, you need to go a license, this, that, and the other. And it's very different. But I do think regulation would actually do more harm than good, because people who get stuff out of life coaching actually get stuff out of life coaching, and people who don't. And they don't need to.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, personally, I think it would be a mistake for someone, a coach, a life coach, an executive coach, whatever, to do therapy under the guise of life coaching.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to ask you, like, to tell me all about your childhood and, try and tie it to your current anxiety or anything like that.
Right.
That's not my thing. If somebody wants therapy, I think it's a good idea to go to a trained therapist. And, I understand the point of regulation because, like in therapy, for example, someone is very vulnerable. The client is very vulnerable. And so the potential for a therapist to take advantage of them is there. And so you try and protect the client in that way. And I suppose that it does exist potentially within the coaching field. The truth is it happens in therapy anyway. It happens in every field. I'm not sure how much regulation prevents it. There are, terrible, unethical people in every profession, whether it's regulated or not. So I'm personally just happy to not have a bunch of people who really don't get me or understand my work try and tell me how I can do it.
Yeah, and I don't even know how you would regulate it. Like, would it be a state thing? Would it be a federal thing? Like, I don't know how.
I don't know.
I don't know how that process would work. But I think it would just be a complete mess. I think it'd be a complete mess. Yeah. Let the free market of ideas in this particular sector, let it be a free market of ideas. Because someone who gets help from you won't get help from someone else. And if you regulate it, I think you're going to hurt the people who are already being helped. And people who don't find it helpful don't need to find it helpful.
That's exactly right. And you know what? I mean, like for me, it's pretty straightforward. If somebody's interested in working with me, they can just come and try it. And I won't even charge them for it. Right. You can come, it's like a test drive for a car. Come have a session with me. Let's dig in. Let's really see if I can be of help, because I'm going to try my best in that conversation to be of service to you. And at the end of that time, you have a pretty good idea of who you're dealing with. It's not like I'm putting on some show for you.
Yeah.
That's it. If you like what I said and you feel like there was a good connection or there was some value to it, then you're more than welcome to do some more with me. And if not, then that's also fine. So, it's easy enough to make that assessment if you want to work with me or not.
And you work with C-suite executives specifically, right? That's like your target.
Not only, but those are the kind of people that I like to work with. Essentially, people, I said a little bit about it earlier, but that who are very driven. That I like the mindset of these people. Okay, I like people that know that I can put my mind to something and create it in the world. So they could be business owners, executives. I've worked with high level pro athletes. One of my recent clients just won the Super Bowl. And it's the same idea. These people are incredibly driven, but they left something behind, you might say. Like in this drive for success in the world, they forgot to check in within themselves to see what really is it that leads to happiness and peace and freedom. These words I keep using, which almost sound like cliches, but it's almost a cliche that we know when people say, well, money can't buy happiness, but the funny part is they'll say that. Or when I'll tell them about these people that strive for success in the world, and then they wake up one morning and they're like, I'm still not happy. What's it going to take if I've already made millions of dollars, or I've already achieved this, I got the corner office or the, whatever it is, all these trappings of success, and I'm still not happy. Well, what's missing? And these people sometimes, the ones that are saying like, oh, we know money can't buy happiness. It's easy to say those words, but in the back of their mind, they're still saying, yeah, but let me prove that for myself. Let me go get a bunch of money first, and then I'll know that it can't buy happiness. Yeah. So they don't really believe that. I think almost everybody has this idea that there's happiness for us out in the external world. And so I like the ones who have already tested that, I guess is the answer to your question, and come up wanting,
Happiness is created. Happiness isn't found.
I'd say it even simpler than that. I'd say happiness is intrinsic. That's one of the unique features when you asked before what's different about the work that I do. We'll have to get into this, and it'll take a few minutes to sort of really help people understand this.
Please, dive deep.
All right, let's do this now. So one of the fundamental distinctions that I make foundational is between what we can call ego versus true self. Now, those are just words, and everybody might define them differently. So let me give you a quick kind of tour of how I define these words. By ego, I don't mean it in the Freudian sense. So we're not talking about superego and id and all that stuff. I use ego simply to describe the identity that we all create beginning around age 2. And the purpose of that identity, well, we created that identity out of fear and insecurity. So no one creates an ego out of joy and happiness. We created, well, let me go through the whole story. So prior to the age of 2, we do not yet have what's called self-consciousness, meaning the baby doesn't have a sense of separation between themselves and their mom. They don't even have a sense that they're different. There's not like a me and a you at that age. So they literally experience life as just consciousness, as one open flow. And then somewhere around the age of 2, we begin to develop self-consciousness. And I joke that it's like somewhere around 2, we suddenly go, oh, I must be the Will everyone's been talking about for all this time, you know? Obviously, it's not that sudden, and it's obviously not a conscious revelation, but it is kind of like suddenly you become aware of a me. And that's a big deal. Now, I joke that because of this, all 2-year-olds are basically narcissists. And by that, I mean that they just became self-conscious. So, like, of course, everything must somehow be about them.
Right.
Now, that's a little bit of a double-edged sword. It seems to be part of our natural development, our brain development, whatever. But the challenge is that 2-year-old now looks through these brand new self-conscious eyes, and we see the world around us, and we see the other people, the adults around us. And I believe, this is my theory, I want to emphasize, I'm not saying this like it's a fact, but we look around the world and we see these adults. Now, remember, we're still looking through eyes that are largely still coming from, tremendous innocence and vulnerability. And I think we look around and we see these adults, we must look really tense and upset to this 2-year-old. Okay, we're like kind of tense and banging into each other, and we just don't look like as happy and free as their intrinsic experience of life. Now, I have to emphasize, all of this is happening unconsciously. So they're not cognitively thinking, Mom looks really upset right now, but on some level, they definitely get it. Now, to this 2-year-old narcissist, they look around the world, they see all these upset people. And unconsciously, I believe they're going to come to a conclusion that this must somehow be my fault. Everyone is upset. I must have caused this somehow. There must be something wrong with me. So this is my explanation for why we create this ego, this identity, because now the unconscious mind, which according to some studies is literally 1 billion times more powerful than the conscious mind, if you think of them like computers. The unconscious mind now says it's not safe for us to be different than our tribe. This is old wiring, 100,000 years ago. If you got thrown out of your tribe, you were dead. You were saber-toothed tiger food or something. So that wiring still exists in us, this primal survival level wiring. So the unconscious mind says, we got to do something. We have to figure out how are we going to fit in with these other people. And so we create an identity just in order to fit in. But it's important to understand, because of that very foundation, because of the reason we create this identity, rather than just being this being of love and peace, we create an identity that is fundamentally founded in fear and insecurity. Does that make sense? How that happens now?
Yeah. No, that definitely makes more sense. The idea of like, I can't remember my first memory, which is ironic because I can't remember it. My earliest memory, but the idea of a 2-year-old being completely self-driven because they don't know anything else, right? And because they can't know anything else because a 2-year-old can't take care of itself, right? It's completely self-dependent. It's not self-dependent. It's dependent on the parents, mostly the mother. So the fact that like everything's about me, it's like, well, yeah, because you can't. It's impossible. But I do like the different idea of the ego, and it still goes back to narcissism, which is phenomenal.
Mm. Well, and so here we are, so we create this identity. And, I mean, I'll take it one step further. In that moment, I say moment and suddenly, it's probably more gradual, but when we make this assessment that there's something wrong with us unconsciously, that something's wrong with me at this level, at this core level, only really, there's maybe, depending on how you look at it, maybe between 6 and 10 variations on this. So by the time we become adults, our neurosis, our anxiety, whatever, it all seems so unique, like my personal version of it. But at this fundamental level, there aren't that many variations. I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I'm not safe. I have to be perfect. I'm alone. These are the kind of decisions that we make about ourselves. And so the ego, the identity that we build on top of that, is designed essentially to prove to the world that we are not this thing that we've decided about ourselves. Mm-hmm. So the entire identity is designed to try and prove to the world that we are in fact worthy or safe or whatever it is, you see? So that's shaky ground. For your entire identity to be built on something like this is shaky ground, at least in my mind.
Could it also be you got to prove to yourself, though? There's some people,
absolutely.
Yeah, some people just like, fuck the word, I want to prove it to myself.
Well, let me say that a little differently. It's not so much prove it to yourself as to hide from yourself this fundamental flaw. At a deeper level, you believe that you're flawed, that you're unworthy, whatever it may be. Mm-hmm. And so you can't sustain that. I mean, people might walk around the world saying, I'm unworthy, I'm not good enough. But for the most part, they're not really saying that from the deepest part of it.
Right.
That's more of a psychological thing, but it will be very difficult, like almost unsustainably painful to live at the level of your fundamental ego wound. The way I'm describing it, you would be like almost bedridden with shame or guilt or anxiety, whatever it may be. And I suppose maybe there are people that operate that way, but those people probably need a lot more help than someone like me is here to give.
What about like imposter syndrome? A lot of successful people have imposter syndrome, where it's like everyone tells you something's amazing. You're just like, yeah, it's all right. It's okay. Right. Like I don't know if I have something like that. Like I think the stuff I create is, I guess sometimes I know it's good. Sometimes it's like, well, it could be better. Right. I always have the mindset of it could be better. I could be better at this.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that imposter syndrome though.
All right. So how have you encountered imposter syndrome?
First of all, I want to say, and this is a little bit of an unusual viewpoint, I don't think imposter syndrome there's a lot of ways you could look at it. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay.
So for example, I coach clients on a regular basis who, I mean, if you're just looking at financial success, who are way more successful than I am. And frankly, than I will probably ever be. I mean, when I'm coaching, pro athletes who are making $30 million a year, I don't really expect that that's ever going to be my path. So there's going to be a part of me that would say, wow, these people make a lot more money than me or whatever. And a part of me might go, who do I think I even am to talk to these people? So that's fine. I just don't get caught up in that. I let those thoughts show up in my brain and I just don't entertain them very much. But it's imposter syndrome. It can be interpreted in many different ways. If you want to kind of parallel it to the things that I was just describing, yeah, in that way, it's probably a problem for someone, because if I think of fundamentally that I'm not good enough, and now I'm in the world and I'm trying to make a living and I'm, maybe an executive or whatever, and I'm still operating, which we do from the perspective of ego, we're still operating from this, there's something wrong with me, then you're never going to overcome that through your accomplishments. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
My son and I had this conversation many years ago. I think it's interesting. Why do rock stars kill themselves? Because if you think about this, and just in terms of numbers, what is the incredibly small percentage of individuals that become like legit rock stars?
It's very low,
almost impossibly small.
Yeah.
And yet, any one of us can probably name 3 or 4 off the top of our head that took their own life in some way, either through drugs and alcohol.
27 Club. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Or through, actually doing it directly. I don't know the numbers here, but I would think that the percentage of rock stars that kill themselves has got to be almost exponentially higher than the number in the general population. Right?
Yeah. Comparatively, sure.
Now, that doesn't make any sense on the surface, because you say, wait a second, these guys got the dream. They got everything that they were supposed to want, and somehow they're taking their own life. Well, of course, there could be lots of explanations. They could be, manipulated by their manager, like, if you watch the Elton John movie or something, or it could be, the loss of privacy. So I understand there are other reasons, but I think that to the point that we're making here, what if you work your whole life to get to something and you've achieved a level that, realistically speaking, you're not going to succeed more than this. You're not going to do more. Another gold album isn't going to change anything. And you're still waking up in the morning feeling empty or unfulfilled or not happy, and now maybe you're doing it in a $10 million mansion. Well, at what point, and if no one has had the conversation with them that we're having right now, in other words, helping them to look within themselves for happiness, not out in the world, that at a certain point you may well come to the conclusion that happiness doesn't exist, that it's a myth, that if I can't be happy with everything I've achieved, then there's just no point in going on. It's a certain kind of despair of realizing that you've gone as far as you can in the world seeking happiness, and realizing you've come to the end of your search and you still haven't found it. That is a very certain kind of despair.
Well, maybe it's stress. I think stress can be one of those reasons. When you are a top rock star, right? Like, say you're, even like today, right? The Rolling Stones, as of recording this, are still touring. They're in their late 70s. Mick Jagger's out there shaking his ass on stage.
I saw them last year.
And apparently they still put on an amazing show.
It was an amazing show, and you would never believe it. I thought they were going to come out in walkers. Yeah. But they were amazing.
But at that age specifically, there has to be a lot of stress. I mean, I'm in charge of a podcast startup, trying to figure out what the hell we are in the world, creating podcast content. That is incredibly stressful. I can't imagine performing in front of Madison Square Garden. So with that success probably comes a lot of stress. And my guess, again, it's not on my theory, a lot of that stress can get in the way of happiness, especially when you reach success.
Okay.
Would you agree?
Well, yes, but there's a qualifier there.
Okay, shoot.
You see, one of the things that I love about the approach that says happiness is within, it's intrinsic. And we haven't finished that part of the conversation, but we'll get back to what I mean by true self and all that stuff. Okay. But once we know that, and it's not a knowing like an intellectual knowing, it's an experiential knowing where you literally go to that place and see for yourself. Once you know that, you realize that there is a part of you that is impervious to stress, that is not affected by how many records you sold or how much. It's not even affected by, the fundamentals of day-to-day living, like how much food you have to eat. Everyone has this being of peace and clarity that I keep referring to. So once we begin to learn to operate from that perspective, stress will just seem less, stressful, honestly. And that's the secret sauce in this approach. It's not stress management. It's not positive thinking. It's not even self-help. It's coming to the realization, I call it self-realization, that who you already are, before you read one more book or take one more seminar or anything else, who you already are is intrinsically happy and peaceful and clear. I could add 20 more words to that list, but you get the idea. So this is not stress management. It's something fundamentally different in the perspective through which you view the world.
I mean, stress can also be healthy for people.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, stress is a motivator. Stress means, like, how I work through stress is working through stress, right? If I'm stressed about something, I work until it's done and the stress is gone. And then I stress about something else. Very successful people have ways to use stress as a weapon to inflict on the world, like for themselves, right? Like, I'm sure Tom Brady uses stress as motivation to throw 50 more touchdowns, right? So how can stress be healthy for people?
Well, I think you just described it. I mean, stress is, the way you're defining it is that it's something where we feel uncomfortable in some way in some current situation. And so it motivates us to make a change. And I think that's legit. I don't have any problem with that. How people define stress is very important.
How do you define stress?
I define stress as the experience of, and experience meaning like my perception of the world or of myself is in not having sufficient resources to accomplish whatever it is that I need to accomplish. So for example, at the most fundamental level, if I'm hungry and I don't experience that I have the resources to get food for myself or my family, then I will experience that as stressful. If I'm hungry, but all I need to do is go downstairs and get a sandwich out of the refrigerator, then I won't experience that as stressful. I'll be like, I'm hungry. I need to go eat. If I'm an executive in a company and I don't experience, it's different type of resources, right? But let's say my company is, there's some problem in the company, whatever it might be. And I don't experience that I have what it takes to steer my company in the direction that it needs to go. And I don't feel like I have it in here, or I don't feel like I have the team in place, the resources in the company, whatever it may be, then I'm going to experience that as stress. You see, if my the ship is going off course and I go, I see that, but I know exactly how to put it back on course and I have the executive team in place to make it happen, I won't experience that as stress. I'll experience that as just something that I need to get done. You see? So that's and then in order to understand that definition, we have to understand what I mean by resources, right? Because you could mean a lot of things. It could mean the basics, like enough money or whatever. That's true. But I talk about internal resources. Internal resources are essentially different forms of energy that we would utilize in different circumstances. So in my model, in my world, I call those type of resources life force, emotion, lower mind, upper mind, and soul, which are names of different types of energy that we would use to accomplish. They have different functionalities in the world. And I can get into what all that means if you like.
Let's go with the mind. I've never heard upper mind or lower mind. I've heard left brain and right brain, but talk to me about upper mind and lower mind.
Sure. It's pretty simple. And these are arbitrary definitions. They're actually, I learned these somewhere else from one of my original teachers in chiropractic, a man named Dr. Donald Epstein, who is just a brilliant visionary wizard walking the earth. But so I think he probably came up with these originally, but lower mind is simply the linear part of our mind. It's, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's, what are the exact steps that I need to take to create this outcome? So it's very linear, very fact-based. And one very important aspect of the lower mind is it is the part of our mind that makes a decision. So the lower mind is a part of our mind that says this, not that. This is very important. So I'm going to turn right at this corner, not left. When you make a decision, you are essentially eliminating the other option. You see what I mean? Like if I go right, I've eliminated for the time being the possibility of going left. It's actually interesting. If you look at the root of these words, the root of the word decide is the same as the word homicide or suicide. And so when you decide, you are literally killing off your other choices.
I think you just changed the way I'm going to look at that word forever.
Yeah, right.
Decide.
Well, decision is the same as incision. Mm-hmm. You're cutting away
cutting something out.
The other choice.
Yeah. So in a sense, you're not really making a choice. You're just destroying the other choice.
Well, you're going in one direction versus the other.
Yeah.
And so
interesting.
That's really important. Like, for example, as an executive, you have to be able to do that. And there may be both options may be good options, and they may, and people may be really unhappy when you make one decision versus another, but you've got to be willing to make those hard decisions, those hard choices sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so that's where the lower mind comes in. The lower mind divides things that way. And it says this or this. And sometimes, yes, I understand it can be this and that, or you can find ways but I'm talking about at every point in time, you can make one decision this way or that way. And this is what the lower mind does. And that's a very important resource to have available to you. Okay. Now, left alone, like without the other resources that I'm describing, it can also be very problematic because you're not using a lot of other information to make your decisions. So to answer the rest of your question, the upper mind is the big picture. It's the whole is now greater than the sum of its parts. So this is your vision that you might have for your company or for your life. Not just what is this particular decision, but how does this decision fit in with the greater vision that I have for my life or my company or my family, whatever it may be. So all of these different, what I call energetic resources that we're describing, they're all designed to work together. It's not that none of them are meant to operate, in isolation from the others.
I like that. I really like that analogy. To me, it speaks to me of the journey and a destination, right? The bottom mind is the journey to decide which way you're going to go. The top mind's the destination. I think it also works for the way people think. I think of chess, right? People play chess. A lot of people play chess one move at a time. That would be bottom thinking, right? Whereas some people from jump, they know how they're going to checkmate you. They know exactly how they're going to do it, the moves and exactly. That's right. And they can adjust on the fly. And I think some people really think towards the end goal, and some people think towards, okay, how am I going to get to that end goal?
Yeah, and both are legitimate,
Yeah, of course.
And ideally, like what if I'm going to work with a client, I want them to have all of these resources available to them. Because, you might be somebody with a huge vision and no ability to execute. In other words, all upper mind, not so much lower mind. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's problematic. If we talk about the other resources. So what I call the soul or not what, what Dr. Epstein called the soul, that's where I get it from, is sort of the best way of describing what I'm meaning by your true self. It's who you are prior to the ego kicking in, and if you want to get, a little, esoteric about it, I believe that, and this is a belief, I want to be clear, like this is not a fact, but I believe that we come into this world with certain gifts, certain resources that are intrinsic to us, that are like our unique gifts that we have to give to the world, and so the soul level intelligence is helping us to be, I don't like that phrase, the best version of me, because typically when they say it, people are referring to the ego without realizing it. They're talking about a personality level.
Yeah.
But to me, the best version of myself is the soul level version of myself, where I'm living in alignment with my deepest gifts and my truest way of being in this world.
Okay. I like that. Soul level. How to achieve soul level. So how that's a good question. How can you achieve soul level?
Well, now we're getting into, sorry, go ahead.
How do you live life in the soul lane?
The soul lane. Well, yeah, it's funny. I use a metaphor called the soul line versus the goal line.
Okay. I like these analogies.
Well, what we're saying essentially in the soul line versus the goal line is the goals are the external things in the world. They're the money or the job or all that stuff that people strive for. And that is often egoically based. And that's where it becomes problematic, is the ego is the part of us that often strives in the world, that is trying to find its happiness, its worth in the world and its accomplishments. And so we're often approaching life from a goal line perspective, but without that soul driving us, without some greater vision of who we are, which is upper mental, or without some deeper sense of a purpose or a contribution that we're making to the world. And so our accomplishments ultimately end up feeling very empty,
Mm-hmm.
But so more to your question, how do we accomplish, however you asked about the soul before, this is what I mean by true self. Okay. The process of self-realization to create what I call the self-realized life is to begin to live more from the perspective of the true self. Mm-hmm. It's to begin to transcend the ego. It's begin to see the ego for what it is, a created identity, like a mask that we've been wearing for so long that we forgot that we were wearing it, as though you were in a play and you're playing whatever, King Lear. And the play is over and, it's time to go home and you're still speaking with that Shakespearean accent and you're still referring to the people as characters in the play. And someone says to you, wait a second, Will, the play is over. You're just Will,
Yeah.
But you forgot. You've become so identified with the character that you play that now becomes who you are. And that's what happens with the ego. We create this identity purely for reasons of survival. I say over and over, fear and insecurity. We create this identity and then we forget that we've created it. And so then we become identified with this false self. And the purpose of self-realization is to see that this is not and never has been who you really are.
So who are you?
That's the question, isn't it?
That's the grand old question.
And in fact, there's no getting around it. This is now a spiritual conversation. Mm-hmm. Because when someone asks, who are you? Or I ask someone, who are you? I'm not asking for a polished up version of the ego.
Right.
Okay. Now, there's nothing wrong, by the way. Like I make fun of sometimes self-help, and I do it intending to be funny. But self-help, most of it, like 90+% of it, all these books and everything, is really about trying to prop up the ego, making the ego more self-confident and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's a place for that because you need in life what I call a functional ego. Okay. You need an ego that can function in the world and at whatever level you want it to function. So if you want to be an executive in business, ideally you need a pretty functional ego. Now that can break down in a lot of ways, but let's just say you have a healthy functional ego and you're running a company. That's great. Okay. You need that. But what I'm saying here is that will never lead to happiness. The nature of the ego can never be happy because it is founded on fear and insecurity. You can have temporary happiness, and that's fine. You get a promotion, you do whatever, your podcast hits 1 million listeners, you're probably going to feel some happiness with that. And I say that's awesome. Okay. But we know, how long does that last, that kind of happiness?
It depends. Honestly, if one podcast, maybe a few days. If it's really successful, maybe a few months. If it stretches out longer, if you get some good news coverage, it can last a little longer. But I think it's a piece of the whole. Like podcasting, you can be happy forever as long as you keep doing it. So it's a piece of the whole.
But so you have to keep refilling it. Then you're saying, as long as you keep doing it,
the gas tank. Yeah, correct.
Right, and then you have a bad one. You see, this is the danger of our happiness being tied to some external event. Something happens, your podcast doesn't have a good week or whatever. They cancel it, whatever happens. And all of a sudden now we're not happy because our happiness was tied to some external event. That is the nature of the ego. I'll give you an example of this.
That's what you're saying. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I've worked with pro athletes. And so think of someone like the football player, whatever, and this guy scores a touchdown. Okay. And you see him doing their happy touchdown dance in the end zone and all that kind of stuff. Now you see in that moment, that athlete is experiencing true joy. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. I would suggest to you, I would challenge that athlete doesn't even really understand what that joy they're experiencing is all about. Now, the obvious answer, if I say, well, what are they happy about? You say, well, they scored a goal. Their team is winning. The crowd is cheering, all that kind of stuff. And I would say, absolutely. I completely understand that. I would feel the same way, By the way, side note, I have sat in the home of one of these, $30 million a year athletes who had an enormous, successful, huge game on national TV. They actually scored 2 touchdowns and all kinds of other stuff. And I talked to him the next day. This is one of the best games of his career. And he was like, yeah, well, like he couldn't feel it in himself because there was something missing. You see what I mean? Mm-hmm. But in the moment, he was celebrating when he scored it. But here's my point, okay, before I go too far down the rabbit hole. I'm suggesting that the joy that athlete is experiencing when they're really celebrating is that for a moment, they get to stop seeking happiness. Like there's nothing left to seek. For a moment, the goal has been reached, and so they can just be happy with nothing to seek. That's a very powerful place to be. But because they tie their happiness to the external, as you've already pointed out, it doesn't last very long. And so they're on to the next thing and the next thing. That's the nature of the ego. So let's talk, because I see somehow, shockingly, that we're running out of time.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens, man. This podcast goes fast. So I do.
Yeah, it does. It goes really fast.
I do want to touch on your freedom course.
Okay, well, before, let me define true self, if I could, because that'll tie back to the freedom course, and happy to talk about that, because true self is critical and we really haven't defined it very well yet. So your true self, and it's difficult to define, I might point out, because it's not something as tangible as the ego. Your true self is who you already are before you create an ego, before you think your next thought. Its very nature, as I've been pointing out, is already peace and happiness and freedom and love, and I could keep going. The trick to seeing it is that you've become addicted, in a way, to the ego, to the external version of yourself, to the mask that we've created. And so the beauty of the approach of just going directly to what I call just to see who you are is that it's already present. It's closer than your next breath. Mm-hmm. But the trick is to be able to see through the mask of the ego. So the process, what we call self-inquiry, is one of learning to question these fundamental ideas about who and what I am. So you asked the question, who are you, earlier? That's, in some spiritual traditions, literally the most fundamental question that you ask. And you ask that question until you answer everything. You know, I'm a male of this age living in New Jersey. You know, right. I grew up this way. I'm a cancer survivor. I'm a person who believes in this and that. I'm a Democrat or a Republican, or, you know, I'm an anti-vaxxer, or whatever elements you put into your identity. You know, you begin to ask yourself, who am I? Is this really who I am? And with true, honest self-inquiry, all of those identities, those aspects of your identity begin to fall away. Like if I wasn't this, or I wasn't that, or on and on, is there something essential about me that wouldn't change? If all of my beliefs were to disappear, or all of if it was suddenly I couldn't remember my history, if I had amnesia, whatever it may be, would there still be something essential about me that doesn't ever change? And we would call that term consciousness or awareness. It is the very space in which all of your experience occurs. So every thought that you think, every perception you have of the so-called outside world, every physical experience or feeling in your body, all occur within this space that I call awareness. The fact that you are aware of something, we take it back into the experience. What is the very nature of this awareness itself? In other words, to be aware of awareness. And that's an inquiry that we probably don't have enough time for today, but that takes us back toward the true self, towards our essential nature. And I could go on and on, but let me see what you have questions or thoughts on that.
Being aware of awareness.
Yeah. It's a little bit of a mind bender.
Yeah. So well, if you're aware of awareness, I mean, aren't you always aware of awareness?
I think you may be defining it differently than I am.
Okay.
It's like you're aware, you might be aware of your thoughts or aware of your feelings, aware of, I see a picture hanging on the wall. But to be aware of the space in which all of those things occur is definitely, it's what you might say, it's meta, right? It's a different frame than the normal space in which you're thinking from.
Right.
And that perspective allows you to see the temporary, transient nature of everything within experience. Anything you experience by its very nature is temporary. You experience your thoughts, you experience your body, but you know these things are changing constantly. But the space of awareness in which they arise and occur does not change. It's consistently the same open space. You know, the space in this room that I'm sitting or that you're sitting right now, we could rearrange the furniture but the space in the room doesn't change.
Okay.
And another name for this space is being. Human being.
So no matter what career path you take, you're still the same? That kind of thing. Like,
Fundamentally, you're the same.
No matter
yes.
what you do in life, if you move from New York to Texas, Texas to California, California to Kalamazoo,
I've done it.
Still the same place? Still the same space?
Well, wait, was California and New York are not the same place? Not the same
space, but like, you're rearranging the furniture.
I'm talking about the space within. Right. Okay. Now we can expand it beyond within, but that's going to take us we don't have that time. So fundamentally, and by the way, I can go another few minutes. I don't have to stop it right on the hour, but okay. I'm talking about your true self as consciousness, as being. That does not change.
Right.
It does not change depending on where you live or what you do for a living. I'll say something even more radical. Okay, that the very nature of this space is love. Now, what I'm suggesting is that Hitler and Gandhi have the exact same space. Their very nature is love. And the only difference is one of them was able to self-realize, to realize that more in the world, and the other was deeply, deeply embedded in an egoic view of the world. Can you guess which one was which?
Something tells me Gandhi was the good one.
That was a softball, correct. But yeah, and so what I'm saying is, every baby, Hitler was a baby.
Right.
And that baby's nature was love. Mm-hmm. Okay. That nature doesn't change. He just deeply, deeply forgot. And someone like Gandhi or Martin Luther King, we could, we probably have lots of people we'd agree on. They somehow found that true nature, that soul, right, which is another word that I used earlier, okay, is what drove them in the world. Martin Luther King didn't think this would be a great business idea, civil rights, It wasn't his ego that drove him. It was something so deep in seeing the humanity that allowed him to see a path to civil rights, a nonviolent path to civil rights, and that's who we really are. And what I do with executives and business owners and all the high performers and overachievers is help them to see, to find that part of themselves so that they can still strive in the world and create cool shit and build big businesses and be productive without losing the peace in their heart. Mm. Because most people think it's one or the other. I can create this enormous life, or I can go meditate in a cave, And I'm saying the two are not in any way in contradiction. I mean, it's in contradiction if you're being unethical, If I'm chopping down the rainforests, then it's going to be difficult to truly find peace in my heart, But if I'm living a life that is aligned with my basic principles of ethics and morality, et cetera, I'm being a good person, and and I know who I am. I'm living the self-realized life as I describe it. There's no reason why you can't have peace and love and freedom and happiness and be working your ass off in the world.
Right.
They're not exclusive at all.
Everyone strives for freedom, and the idea of freedom, this is a thought I've been going back and forth with recently, so I think it'd be appropriate to ask you. With the idea of freedom, are you more free as an adult or as a child?
Now we're talking about external or extrinsic freedom.
Okay.
Okay. The answer in the context of what I've been talking about, right, is it makes no difference.
No difference.
And you might even say the child is more still attuned to that inner freedom.
Right. Let's start with inner freedom, not inner freedom.
Well, then I would say in most cases, practically speaking, the child is more free. Like if you go into a kindergarten class and you ask, hey kids, how many of you is an artist? Every kid is going to raise their hand. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And then if you ask that same question in first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up to high school, let alone if you went into like a business or workplace, you'd find fewer and fewer people raising their hand.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now what happened? Did they suddenly, and obviously you could make the joke, as I've heard it made, well, you ever see what a 6-year-old draws? They think they're an artist, but it's the
That's
freedom.
External. That's external.
Right, exactly.
External.
Exactly.
Internally.
It's the freedom
internally.
to believe that I can create anything.
Yeah.
And that's not all that freedom means, but it's just an example. So yeah, we do. But as the ego develops and becomes more complex and more, and obscures more and more of the truth of who you really are, I do believe that our experience of life is that we are less free. We are not actually less free because freedom is intrinsic. It never goes away.
Mm-hmm.
But the experience of life will probably be, I am less free.
Interesting. All right. It's a lot to take in. I'm going to go back, listen to this and dig deeper, dig in even more. But we are running out of time.
Yeah.
I'll cut the chiropractic. We'll come back to it. I'll bring you back.
We'll have to. Yeah,
I'll bring you back because there's a lot more we need to dig into. But the final question always goes to the guest. If there's anything you want to ask me, you can always plead the fifth because I kind of like to throw a curveball at the end of the podcast.
Is there anything I want to ask you?
Yeah, anything you've ever wanted, anything you want to ask me about in preparation for this podcast. Last question. I like to throw it to the guest. They can ask me something.
Oh my God. I mean, I don't know if I have one question for you, Will, but I have a lot of respect for what it takes to put this on, so, I mean, I would rather sit down with you over lunch or even over Zoom and like talk to you about that for an hour or 2 or 3, because I really think that it's amazing to do the work that it takes to create, even a relative level of success in something like this, and to have, people that come back and want to listen and what all the parts of that puzzle that it takes to put it together. Thank you for doing this.
It's a lot. A podcast is a lot of work, but Fred, I think you would benefit greatly from a podcast. You have no problem talking for a long
what's that?
You have no problem
just
talking and expressing yourself and conveying your thoughts in a clear and concise way.
Yeah, for sure. And creating the space like you did for me, which I really appreciate, to express my views and thoughts and ideas. I think it's okay if I make a little offer to people, let them.
Yes, please.
And the reason I do this is because we talked about some pretty woo woo. It's not really woo woo, but ideas that are maybe hard to really fully understand just at first listening to this podcast. And so if you're someone out there who is listening to this and really are experiencing that something I'm saying resonates with you, like I'm working really hard to achieve success, and yet I don't feel peaceful. I don't feel happy. And maybe I'm beginning to realize that the next achievement isn't going to change that. There's always a next achievement, and you'd like to maybe explore this approach a little bit longer. My standard approach, which I think I said to you in the beginning, is I will sit down with someone and, whether it's virtually or if you're in Austin, Texas, come on by, and really explore this with them specifically as it applies to their life. In other words, how does this perspective of true self or true nature apply to my situation in my business or in my marriage, or just in my own search for happiness? Let's sit down and talk about that. And I don't ever charge for that first conversation, because I want you to get a sense of this for yourself before we ever talk about any longer term commitment than that. So I assume we'll have some contact information somewhere in the show notes or something.
Yeah, it'll be in the show notes. Anything you want to plug, your website, social media, LinkedIn, anything you want to plug?
Well, it's funny. My website is currently under reconstruction because it was one of those weird situations where it just basically disappeared off the internet and we couldn't rebuild it. But the web address is energyrichliving.net. And there's actually, there's not a link to this, but if you go to energyrichliving.net /test drive, that's where you can actually get on my calendar to set up one of those initial conversations. So, please feel free to do that if you feel like this would be a valuable conversation for you to have. And yeah, that's it. I'm happy to share with people.
All right. Well, Fred, thank you very much for being a guest on the Talking with Tarashuk podcast. I greatly appreciate it. I thought this was a very fun and informative conversation. I'm going to have a lot of fun going back and editing so many clips here. And I can't wait to bring you back. My rule is once a quarter. So what's it? August? That's what? 3 months? November. So around
November it is.
Around Thanksgiving time, we can run it back and do it all again. Thank you very much, Fred.
All right. Well, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you for doing this. Take care. All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Will Tarashuk. This has been a Talking with Tarashuk podcast. All my shenanigans, ambiguouspodcastsolutions.com. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, Apple, Amazon, anywhere and everywhere podcasts can be found. The videos on YouTube, shorts on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all the fun places. You all know that by now. I'm Will Tarashuk, T and Thomas, Arashuk. I'll be back next week, actually 2 weeks. Dr. Phil Riccobono is coming back to the podcast. Going to talk about baseball. My very first guest on this podcast talking baseball, the first half of the season, trade deadline, all-star game. So many fun things coming up. Can't wait to talk to Phil again, a good old friend who I met on the great world of podcasting. Until then, I'll take care.